So it seems that we are now live on YouTube on our channel. So I'd like to welcome everybody who is watching us and who has joined us for the discussion about the situation in Belarus. My name is David Stolik. I'm a senior analyst at the European Values Center for Security Policy. And today we'll, as I said, we'll discuss the situation that is unfolding very dynamically in Belarus, and we'll discuss the future prospects of that development. And we have three really great speakers, and we are very happy that they found time and agreed to join us. So let me first introduce Katsiaryna Shmatsina, who is the political analyst at the Belarusian Institute for Strategic Studies, and Katya is also a fellow at the German Marshall Fund. Then we have from Minsk, Aliaksandar Lahviniec, who is a Belarusian political analyst, lecturer, and activist. And Aleš has a kind of good experience with presidential elections in Belarus, because back in 2006, he was an advisor to the presidential candidate, to Aexander Milinkevich. And last but not least, we have Jakub Górnicki from Poland, who is one of the co-founders of a great journalistic project, Outriders.com. Jakub was in Minsk in Belarus until very recently, from where, with his colleagues, he was covering the events in Belarus, not only in Minsk, but also in the regions. So these are our great three panelists. First, couple of organizational issues. You can find the link under this video to a slide.do website where you can ask your questions. So we are inviting you to ask the questions, which we will then read out to our speakers, and then they will answer them. So first, let me start with Katya. And my question, as a sort of a kickoff question to you, would be, how do you see the situation evolving further? What can we expect in the coming days? What kind of scenarios are most plausible? So, Katya, if you are ready, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Greetings, happy to join this discussion. When we talk about the developments in Belarus, I want to underline that both sides, the protesters and the regime, have very high stakes, and both have very much quite a lot to lose in case if they decide to give up. And so this puts us in a very tense situation when neither one has the incentive to give up. For Lukashenko, I think it's quite obvious that it's not only about his political ambitions to stay in power for one more term, but also if he somehow loses this grip on power right now, he will have to also lose most likely immunity, or it would put in question his future, and not only his future, but also his establishment and his family. So it also goes a little bit further than just personal ambitions. And then on the protester side, if they go back, if the protest sort of loses the momentum and this protest sort of inspiration, then what would happen next is that Lukashenko would just impose very tough environment on the civil society, let alone on the protest, on the leaders of the protest. And then Belarusians have a very high risk then of isolation, and they would work in much more tense, non-democratic environment that it was happening in the previous years. So again, both sides have a lot to lose. I think that when we talk about scenarios, again, hard to predict what happens next. Everything is changing daily. But I would say that the protest mood is not going anywhere. And when we hear some suggestions that people are tired. Well, yes, they are tired because they are participating in those demonstrations, not only during past 2 weeks, but also at the presidential during the rallies in support of the presidential candidates, and people were also active on the streets for months. Not only again for those 2 weeks, but when someone says that the protest is losing momentum, this message likely comes either from pro-Lukashenko's analysts or pro-Lukashenko propaganda, because that would play in their support to show the picture that people are losing this momentum. And when we talk about scenarios, I think that again, hard to predict something, but I think that the Lukashenko, what he's trying to do now is to check the loyalty of the power vertical, and then to clean up the system from those who are at the question of sort of betraying him and changing sides. And we've seen those representatives or like staff from the MFA who were expressed in support of the protesters, and the ambassador of Slovakia who was removed from his job. So those are just like the more on the milder side, the very minor measures, how he can check the loyalty of the vertical. But at the same time, by the way, we haven't heard any harsh repressions on those who, let's say, the lower like position people in the police who changed sides, who voiced support for protesters. So at one side, I would say that Lukashenko is demonstrating strength by posturing with this military and riot police forces. But at the same time, when he is when he sees that some people from his former establishment, when they change sides or slightly show this possibility of change, he does not act harsh on them, probably not to irritate the rest of the team in the establishment, and just to act more mildly. I think that now he is buying time and regrouping, in the sense that he wouldn't act very harshly on the coordination council, like, I don't know, like putting everyone in prison on criminal charges. Rather, it's more convenient for the system to slowly disrupt their activity, to detain one person, then another, then interrogate another, and then again, not so much on criminal charges, but just for nice conversation, sort of without any like criminal charges at the moment, and then again like buy time, and then hope that the protest would somehow go away, or some other unexpected factors play in, like Putin voicing support. Like I think we will talk about this further, the geopolitical side. And I think on the protest side, I think we can expect that not only the street actions, but also people participating, more people joining this strikes, and the sort of Italian style strike, when you kind of when you show up to your workplace, but you work very slowly and you sabotage the system from inside, when people would try to coordinate within their community to not rely on the government, on the state services, maybe not to pay the utilities or some other payments due to the state, not to support the system. So I think that that's the most plausible scenario for the next weeks, if not month. And I would be cautious with other more like radical kind of developments. I think that's like ideally, like what I would see happening is that the coordination council gets more voice and actual recognition from, let's say, like international community, and also somehow manage to bring Lukashenko to the negotiation table. And at the same time, I want to warn the maybe the international or like the foreigners who are not so familiar with the Belarusian context, is that not to buy the words of Lukashenko if he somehow says that he agrees to some kind of talks, because today he was saying that, okay, I'm happy, I'm kind of ready to negotiate, but this won't be the protesters on the street. We can bring in some labor unions or some other people from even student unions, because they are the future. Let's talk about the new constitution or the changes to the constitution. That's again just the tactics of buying time. And again, I wouldn't see that, ideally, or maybe the best scenario for Belarus would be that, let's say, Tikhanovskaya returns to the country, or the Coordination Council, and Tikhanovskaya somehow managed to change the status quo and get actual recognition. But I think that's too premature to talk about that. And again, I think that most plausible scenarios for the short term is that both sides would try to buy time and sabotage each other from inside.
Thank you, Katya. Now I will turn to Jakub. Jakub, what are the feelings and thoughts of the people on the ground? You traveled to a couple of towns in Belarus. So would you say, as Katya actually contradicted it, that the protests are losing the momentum? Are the people somehow tired with being on the streets already for the third week? So how would you describe the moods and feelings on the streets of Belarusian cities? I have to turn on microphone.
Yes, I do. Hi, thank you for having me. Yes, we have been to a couple of cities. We also have team members based in different cities. Well, the situation is changing every day. But after some time you can develop some patterns. So when it comes to last week, we have seen, especially after Tuesday, that Lukashenko started to regain his confidence, and that each day last week, leading to the new Belarus march on Sunday, he was trying to dismantle as much as possible of attendance when it comes to this march, especially that a lot of Belarusians were encouraged to travel to this gathering on Sunday from their own cities. So we could see that people were stopped while leaving their cities, or they were stopped while they were entering Minsk. Everything was being. Even on Saturday, when Lukashenko made this unexpected appearance in Hrodna, when he said that, for example, in Hrodna, the KGB has 2 days to restore the power of authority, let's put it this way. And then since Monday, so since, let's say, 3 days ago, the government will be the government, more or less my rough translation of what he said. So I would say that especially especially Sunday in Minsk was nervous, because you could see, for example, what happened just in front of the apartment where I was staying. There was 2 water cannons just showed up in the morning, and then 15 SUVs, which are designed to dismantle the crowd. And they just stopped there for 10 or 15 minutes, and they went to another block. So it was just to, it wasn't, I don't believe that they would actually do it, but it was to, strike fear among people, so you look down and like, oh shit, maybe I won't go today, And when I arrived 5 minutes to 2, and at 2 p.m. it was supposed to be scheduled at the Independence Square, I was like, wow, okay. But, because people were being slowed down, it took them, let's say, up to an hour to actually gather around. So you could actually feel that, especially when we arrived at 2 p.m., it was like, even the militia for the first time, they were going into the crowd. 2 or 3 guys, they would go into the crowd. You could even see, when you have your beer at 8 p.m., that what didn't happen for a couple of days, that suddenly there is like this big militia guy just walking through the street, which was like, we are back, kind of like feeling. So it was, last week, it was all about like trying to restore the knockdown I think Lukashenko received, a week before, which was the first big march, which was the Monday really bad decision to go. I mean, he made, like, first of all, he organized his own, this little rally on the same day where there was this big rally, and he allowed people to see for themselves, comparing photographies, how many people attended his event and how many people came out to peacefully protest. Then on Monday he met with the factory workers, and that didn't go according to his plan, because he heard some words I don't think he wanted to hear. So it was, I think, Monday, Tuesday, for And then after this, leading to Sunday, the machine of fear, you could really see those little elements showing up, the people with flags, with the state flags, driving around cars and so. So I think Sunday was still on the protester side, because in the end, a lot of people gathered, and even though there was visibly much more OMON and much more militia, just next to the protesters, there were trucks full, or you could see the boots hidden by the blanket or so. And then since Monday, basically what we see, and this is another trend. So last week, I would say the trend was, let's see, because what happened is that, and they try to restore that feeling of fear because they lost it during those 5 or 6 days where some people called it like the festive of freedom. There was almost no militia seen on the streets. Especially Minsk was owned by its citizens. That feeling of, it was more of a feeling of a music festival rather than even a revolution, I would say, understood in this way, because there was nothing burning, everything was cleaned and so on. So they try to and if there is no fear, you cannot control, especially if you rely so much on police, army, and so. Whereas from this Monday, you could see that, and you could see that whenever there is even a little rally, a protest, women will gather, very, very, let's say, immediately some police shows up, or secret agents try to dismantle the crowd. There are some, and we are Thursday. Yesterday those 56 people detained. If I read, I read it. A third of it was stopped yesterday at the Independence Square. So a week ago there was 0 or maybe 1 person at the same time, which would have been detained. So every day, I think the signal which is trying to be sent is like, we are back, stop protesting, but at the same time, very cautiously, because every person with whom I talk to who's on the streets says that number one reason basically for them to be on the streets is the brutality of days following the election. What happened there has been so brutal that it made people slightly fearless, I would say, and at the same time devoted to the cause. And from our conversations, also with factory workers, they seem very much. They even tell us, that they're ready, and you can see the difference between, let's say, Minsk and factory cities. Minsk is more around freedom issues or around values. Whereas when you talk to factory workers, it's more about dignity, quality of work, which is kind of to be expected, but I think it's also important to make it vocal. Different people, are protesting on the streets of Minsk, whereas, I don't know, in Soligorsk or in Grodno Azoty or in different factories. But those two are currently those which still try to push somewhat, but the strikes are not happening there on such a big scale as they could have, as they were happening, let's say, last week. So just to finish it, from my perspective, this, and I would add up to what Katsiaryna was saying, is that it seems that, both, I mean, Lukashenko has more time. That is for sure. He has more time than the protesters have. I wouldn't say that there is, and I agree with Katsiaryna here, that I don't feel that the energy is going down, that there is some kind of disappointment. Both sides are adapting, simply. And for many people, they are on the streets every day for past 30 days. It's natural. I think if there are some decisions made, even not to protest every day, that doesn't mean that the energy is there. You got to regroup at some point. Lukashenko did regroup last week. He had bought himself some time, which was massively used by protesters. So that's one thing. The other thing is, what are the next steps? You can see that the Coordination Council is getting a hang of it, I would say. At the same time, they have to visit the investigation committee. Like every day, one member of, at least up until today, goes there. But you can see that if something happens bad, like yesterday, For example, when initially the protests at Independence Square were trying to be smart, and a lot of police showed up. And I think that that lockdown of the church, you know, that is a Middle Ages scene, kinda, you know, that's disgusting, you know, like, sorry, that's my personal comment, but, you know, it's like in people's head, they're like, because if you are familiar with Independence Square, that is especially this church, I think for many protesters, there's a place where they, in case something would be happening, they would run there, even if they couldn't fit. Let's say there is too much people, but the doors were always open, and you would just run there. But from the media side, I think what is happening in Belarus is unfortunately approaching this very dangerous zone, which is there is not going to be enough happening to keep up with for the international media to report so much on the events as they are doing, but less up until today. And this is more of a thinking, you know, because one of the things which we try to also do is we try to encourage as many journalists to go to Belarus. Even if they will not be let in, that means that you only spend a nice night on the Minsk airport and you fly back home. That's not bad option. But if you get through, you know, journalists on the ground, they really support, the presence supports journalists who are Belarusian. And I think it's really important because a regime always treats its own citizens worse than foreigners. So this is my huge appeal to the international journalist community. And since I came back yesterday, Tuesday night, we started to talk to a lot of organizations. So it's not even about financial support, because I do think that all of the money should go into Belarus directly to people who are on the ground. But there are those little soft things which can be done. There is basically the Belarusian Ministry of Foreign Affairs is not giving press accreditations, which means that you have to find your story to enter the country, and you have to then just work well without getting caught. But still, it's not like this is new for journalists, that they are not very welcome in authoritarian countries. So this is my big appeal, you know, how to keep momentum. We have to get more stories out. One thing is the news, getting information daily, but then covering different angles of the stories, you know, which are like how people feel. I think that I'm really afraid that soon, I mean, this is what's going to happen. If there will be less information about Belarus, everybody will think that that the protesters or the protests lose the momentum. This is what people will think, even if this isn't true, because this is somewhat, you know, the media cycle, unfortunately, is that's how it works. Something then will happen. And just let me remind you that September 1st is approaching. Politicians are going back from holidays in Europe, so they will do new scandals and so on. So this is something like this. But I think that journalists can really do a lot, and they should try to enter, because they still can. If the border will be, for example, locked, if there will be some different forms, then yes, but it's hugely important to be on the ground. We have a team also on the ground, even though I am not here, and we just try to support them for as much as we can. I'm sorry I talked for so long, but I will give right now back voice to you, David.
Thank you, Kuba.
Interrupt me next time. I just looked at the time and like, oh,
no. It was so
he's never going to invite me. So,
no. No, it was so interesting what you were saying, and I can only confirm that I'm following your Facebook account Unblock, which is in Polish, but people can also like visit your website and check the coverage of Belarusian events there. And also, we will come back to that issue, what we all could do for Belarusians in the streets. And you mentioned, for example, the journalists. So I can tell you that we tried to get there a couple of our good friends, journalists, and I must tell you that most of them ended up that one night at the Minsk airport and had to go back. But there are still few people who are there who are bringing very, I would say, unprecedented testimonies from there. Of course, there are certain ways how, you know, they have to make it more, let's say, not attributable to them. But these things are happening. But we'll come back to that issue, what the West, what the EU, or what all of us could do later on. Let me remind to our followers and people who are watching us that you can still place your questions at the Slido website. That is, the link is under this video, so don't hesitate and ask our panelists there. Now let me turn to Ales, who is in Minsk, and there is a bad internet connection, so we don't see you, Ales, but we hope that we would be able to hear you. And I would be very much interested in your, let's say, point of view from your point of view of a political analyst. What sort of political discussions are now happening in Minsk that we don't see? Is the Coordination Council somehow having informal negotiations with people from Lukashenko's, let's say, entourage? What the Russians are doing there on the ground? We know there are some of them already there. So what sort of talks are there? What sort of outcome of these talks could be? Ales, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks a lot. It's a pleasure, and I'm happy to share my views. Well, first of all, as an introductory note, at the beginning of the campaign, I didn't expect that we would have such a mobilization. And now many Belarusians would be proud of themselves and of their nation. Now, well, there are many things that show that maybe still the mobilization is losing some momentum. And what we don't have many, let's say, many steps forward, or even small steps forward. Well, we as in general civil society are under huge pressure. The regime continues to do what it's done, and is doing its job in targeted repression. While the repression goes on each day, while the expectations for the strikes of plants and workers go on strike, unfortunately didn't meet. Were not met. I mean that mostly enterprises work. There are still some outbursts of solidarity, like today at the Institute of Cardiology. But these are mostly separated, fragmented protests. The leaders of the strike committees were very pressed. Some of them left the country. And with the Coordination Council, still it has to have its own identity and its own, let's say, its own role as an actor, because there are few declarations. This is good, but it should be let's say we still continue to get information from Nechta about next steps, not from Coordination Council. And this is also a sign that it goes like it was, but there is no a political actor that takes initiatives and puts the regime on the defensive. So we'll see. As for the mobilization, we'll see this weekend, this Saturday, what will happen. And it turns out that Lukashenko would have his birthday, and then some calls that people have to demonstrate and to say farewell to him. But anyway, we'll see. Mostly people work, and not all of them join the evening protests, and they wait until weekend. So as for the scenarios, we are moving towards kind of military dictatorship. If even if the Coordination Council still has its own identity and becomes a genuine center of actor and the center of authority, we might still end up in a kind of Venezuela scenario, with the regime controlling all the so-called power agencies and the bulk of the economy. So the major, we'll see. That they understand that they do not have majority in the country. And today I read reports that for the 1st of September, this is the beginning of the school, academic year across the country, both in schools and universities. And they, in many schools, because of the teachers' involvement in the electoral commissions, they just would not have a general gathering of pupils and parents to avoid incidents. So it shows that they understand that the situation is still very shaky for the regime. But what comes now, to my mind, to the fore is the economic challenges to the regime. The regime failed to deliver for last 10 years to deliver better economic growth, and expectations are very low, and the national currency is losing more, is devaluating, and now this is really a problem. And there another challenge for the regime, and one has to think about the how to combine both political claims and economic claims, would be in the autumn the economic situation. Another development which might allow to keep a bit the momentum is the idea of, which Lukashenko already commented, idea of recalling. We have a bit atavistic feature, because normally in the democracies, there are only a few democracies, it seems to me, where this recalling procedure exists. Do you have it in the Czech Republic? I suppose no.
Like recalling the deputies or president, like impeachment?
Recalling the members of parliament, deputies, elected.
No.
We don't have. So
we don't have that.
It comes from the Soviet times, and the latest initiative is, and it brings some hope. Well, because the protesters, and mostly I assume that it comes from the united headquarters, and let's say from the coordination council. Now there is, from yesterday, there is an initiative to try to act locally and try to recall back from their duties the elected officials. The so-called elected officials. We don't have elected officials, so well, we don't have elections. But to recall, first of all, members of parliament, and this is maybe, even if it is, if it does not succeed, this is a good tool of mobilizing people at the local level. What we lack still, all politics is local, yeah. What we lack still is the solidarity, local solidarity, and local networks. So I joined today in my former constituency. I used to run during several elections as a candidate. I joined a chat of 300 persons, and they discussed how to organize this campaign of recalling a candidate, an official candidate that was, let's say, appointed by the authorities following unfair election last year. So it might provide another opportunity for people getting known each other, and also engaging in some political action. Lukashenko commented today saying that I would protect my deputies, they were elected and they can count on me. And surely the response of the regime is was expected to be like that. But on the other hand, the more we have, the more local networks, local action we have, the better it would be. Because the regime stopped repression when they reached the so-called residential areas, mikrorayony. And when people started to protect each other, and to also to be very negative about the regime, and they also, many people, it was a mistake of the regime, many people in the residential areas saw the police brutality. And now, if there is more action and more people who are instrumental for the regime for rigging election, or also organizing this so-called ideological vertical, if more people at the lower level are exposed, and when the social context is such that they feel uneasy to be the regime servants, this is a good thing. So we still have to learn how to act at this local level, and how to achieve maybe smaller political objectives. Surely the overall demand, the new election is there, but without some breakthrough, let's say, it's difficult to see how the regime would accept this demand, and would hold a new presidential election.
Thank you, Ales. Thank you for your insight and for your impressions. Very much appreciated. So, well, and you mentioned the glooming economic problems. I mean, I would expect the economic problems to come to Belarus anyway, even without the latest events, because the prospects are really not very promising. And here we come to geopolitical aspects, because your country is so closely linked to Russian economy, is so dependent on Russia. So what would be the geopolitical implications for Belarus of the current situation? Because that's also one of the questions that we are getting here in the EU, in the Czech Republic, almost every day. What Russia is going to do as next, right? And here, for example, in our think tank, we are also looking or comparing, if it's possible, the situation in Belarus with Armenia, where also Pashinyan won the elections 2 years ago, but he basically maintained the course of the country oriented on Russia. So how are these things reflected among protesters? What are also, again, your personal takes on that? And let's start again from Katsiaryna. Katya, please.
Shall we start with Russia and then briefly touch some other major actors, I guess, or the other way around, actually. Like, let's start with China, because Xi Jinping was the first one to congratulate Lukashenko on the so-called victory of the elections. So I would say that for China, things are not clear yet in terms of further commitments towards cooperation in Belarus, in terms of Belt and Road Initiative, other cooperation agreements, starting with the very fact of the COVID consequences for the world economy, and also for the Belt and Road Initiative, which would likely be restructured, especially the hard infrastructure projects would be restructured and reassessed in terms of profitability on the Chinese side. And also with, I would say that China is cautiously watching the developments in Belarus. Given that they're both, like, Beijing and official Minsk are not the most democratic, have not the most democratic leadership, to say the least, then they tend to back up each other, at least on the level of rhetoric. And what was interesting is that during the the COVID pandemic times, when let's say China was or like Chinese groups were, let's say, purchasing ads on Facebook to promote a favorable image of China globally. In Belarus, they did not have such need to do so, because Belarusian state media themselves were trying to portray Beijing very favorably. And what I mean by that is that for Lukashenko, China is a very attractive major power, which allows him to rebalance dependence and ties with Russia in the context where ties with the West are underdeveloped. And then what happens now at the level of statements of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, like diplomats from China, again, they perceive these developments with caution, and I would say that they might seize the opportunity. Let's say if Lukashenko stays in power, then Belarusian economy would still be very vulnerable, and then they might seize the opportunity of, let's say, providing another loan to Belarus, or proceeding with other offers through like Belt and Road Initiative and stuff like that. But it's at the same time they're more in the sort of distant, non-interference positions. When we look at Russia, there is a lot being said about the fears of Russia's interference, and from my conversations with, let's say, like ambassadors of the Baltic states, they are mostly concerned about this prospect, or Ukraine also is concerned about possible Russia's moves to bring some troops as the most radical scenario. Like I wouldn't dismiss this completely, but I wouldn't say that those chances are close to zero. But at the same time, I think that for Russia, it is more, Russia already has enough leverage, political and economic, over Belarus to act more in a more covert way, to use the fact that Lukashenko is now quite in a weak position, and if he manages to stay in power, then Belarusian economy would need some money and help, and then Putin, as he always used to do so, he can gladly give some cheap loans with some hidden political agenda attached to it. And I would also bring up interesting narratives that come from pro-Russian propaganda networks in Belarus. They do not indicate much. It doesn't mean that the Kremlin is sort of amplifying their plans through those networks, but rather more like testing the waters. And those pro-Russian networks that operate in Belarus, they have demonstrated quite a radical change of narratives towards...
Katya,
yeah, sure.
We are losing you. I think that we've lost your both video and audio.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I have it all the time. Maybe you did, David.
Okay. What was the last thing?
Oh, you are back now. Okay.
I heard everything, so I don't know how about that.
Okay, then it's my connection.
Oh, okay.
Probably.
Okay, so just briefly to touch on this, like pro-Russian propaganda media, is that they do not voice explicit support for Lukashenko anymore, which they used to for years. And right now they tend to criticize Lukashenko more, and they talk about possibility of consolidating pro-Russian groups in Belarus, pro-Russian political forces, and also possibly about mediation that Russia can play if it comes to international mediation in terms of like crisis in Belarus. And I think again that for Putin now he would for him to explicitly support Lukashenko and to put all sort of eggs in one basket is not the best move. And what Putin and overall policy makers in Kremlin are doing, and this is noticed at the level of rhetoric in the State Duma, there are different actors who support different narratives towards Belarus, and then like Russian propaganda would say that the Belarusian opposition are like crazy radicals, and they are experiencing, the Belarus is experiencing meddling from the West, but at the same time, there would be completely different statements saying that they respect the domestic process happening in Belarus, and that they keep a distance from this domestic processes in Belarus. So I would say that, to put it briefly, that Kremlin is watching the situation closely in Belarus, but they are not putting all the eggs in one basket. They diversify their options, and they would seize the opportunity to, I would say that Kremlin is now at the point where they have enough leverage over Belarus, no matter what leadership comes next. Whether Lukashenko stays in power, Belarus is vulnerable with all these deep integration agreements, be it Eurasian Economic Union, Union State, or vulnerable Belarusian economy, dependence on Russian money. Or if new leader comes, if at some point if that happens, maybe that's too optimistic to expect at the moment, then he or she won't be able to to pivot from Russia overnight. There still be those economic agreements, legal agreements, and in that case, if Russia interferes or sort of supports the whoever wins, then Russia would save the face internationally, and also even possibly like participate in the mediation and try to sell itself as a responsible international actor in the region. And also, I would like to very briefly, I don't know how much time we have, to talk about.
Maybe Katya,
yeah, sure.
I will stop you here because there is. I will then ask Ales to answer the following questions that we receive, and which is very much related to this topic. And the question reads out like that: Is Kremlin controlling the institution of Belarus through the experts that have been parachuted to first army, then police, then intelligence services, media, and the political machinery? Are there these Russian experts already there? Because we saw also a couple of planes landing in Minsk. So, Ales, do you have any insight into these issues?
What is obvious that we have Russian journalists who work for the regime, who replaced the Belarusian journalists who resigned or were fired from the from the public television. This is already obvious. And there are some talks about the Russian political consultants working for Lukashenka and offering their help. I suppose that this is the fact as well. It seems to me that the cooperation between the security bodies never stopped. And many people in Belarusian KGB are either of Russian origin or have close links with their Russian friends because they graduated from the same schools. And the system, the same goes for the army. Well, the current defense minister, he was born in Belarus, but his father was a Russian Soviet military based in Belarus. So there are close links between the so-called power bloc with Russia, and I think that the rumors that some of the officials tried to ask Russia whether they could have flee to Russia following the change shows also that these links are very strong. And we have also a record of several ministers, for example, Interior Minister Naumov or some other people who ended, or Latipov, who ended working for Russian companies or just immigrating to Russia. So the influence of Russia is very strong, and surely today's words of Putin that they prepare people to send to Belarus is a clear warning. That they would not tolerate a kind of color revolution in Belarus, because for Russians it would be a huge inspiration for Russian citizens who also want change in their country. And surely for the guys in the Kremlin, while Belarus is not it's just a backyard of Russia, it's not a separate country, and they don't have even their own language, which is artificial, according to their foreign minister. So for Russia, it's impossible to afford a democratic change in Belarus if it happens. And also, well, I don't know whether it's true or not, but it might be that some of the people who are right now popular or even in prison in Belarus might have also some other Russian connections. There are plenty of so-called conspiracy theories over there. This is why some people talk about the old opposition and the new opposition. And it's true that Russia has tremendous instruments of influencing the situation in Belarus. But I believe that if there is a clear-cut political will, that Russia would for change, and there is a change, Russia would be reluctant to intervene physically and militarily. And from this point of view, maybe anticipating the further discussion, well, the position of the West is very important. Yeah. And economically, surely Belarus is dependent upon upon Russia. But anyway, this economic model was built by Lukashenka. And himself he started to change it. But and there are limits of the he cannot reform, as he said. He wants only to improve. But any leader, post-Lukashenka leader, would have to implement reforms in Belarus, and it means if Belarus is to remain a sovereign country and sustainable country, well, it has to reform, and it means reducing the over-reliance on Russia, on the Russian market.
Thank you. I guess I know what Katya wanted to continue with, and that will be the other geopolitical players like the EU, NATO, and the US. But before we move to that, or maybe we can just gradually enter this discussion by the following question that I have to Jakub. We know that Lukashenka is using this threat of, alleged threat of NATO at the western borders with Belarus as a sort of a reason, as a sort of a reason why he is mobilizing the army, why he's raising the stakes. But do the people on the street believe in that the NATO is like ready to intervene? Is it actually like having an impact on people?
Not only NATO, but specifically Polish people. And since I am one.
Sorry, Jakub. And I also saw a statement made by Mateusz Piskorski, right? Your pro-Russian Polish politician who said that Poland would like to get back the territories of Western Belarus.
Yes. There was some people who are usually pro-Russian. They have made, I think there was one or two people actually like this who made either today or yesterday such comments, which were of course then happily picked up by Lukashenka's propaganda. The fear of losing Grodno and Brest is, I think, present in Lukashenka's propaganda for not now. It's for years. With the people with whom I have spoken, especially in Grodno, I have not had a feeling that they treat me as a Polish spy who is there to take it back. Very friendly conversations. Frankly speaking, I think. What we have to remember is that both Grodno and Brest have this no visa travel for Polish people since a couple of years, I think, right now. I don't specifically remember for how long, but for touristic reasons you can travel by bike or by foot or so, which I think also softens that feeling, because it's. The power of fear is especially powerful if you don't see the enemy. We have seen that with refugees when it comes to how this works or so. And just to answer the question, I didn't feel it from the protesters, especially in Grodno. Absolutely not. I mean, I think the tourists are rather missed for the local economy than frightened because of some sort of. This is just unthinkable. So, it's just silly, I would say, this whole argument and so on. And just so you know, the Belarusian ambassador to Poland has been requested to visit. There is the special form. I don't know how to translate it, but the Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs requested the Belarusian ambassador to come to the ministry today at 3 p.m. And they wanted to give them like a formal protest for exactly this, saying that Poland has any intentions of doing so. So at least this happened from the Polish side today on this level. That's it for me, because I'm a more observer than opinion giver. So when it comes to more talking about geopolitics, I would have to leave it. I'm sorry, David, you're muted. Unless you don't talk to me.
Right. So let's now go back to the other geopolitical players, especially the EU. And as we are talking, there is the ministerial meeting in Berlin where the foreign ministers of the EU are deciding on the EU strategy towards Belarus. So what would you, Katya, say that the EU should do in this moment? What would be the ideal, again, let's say ideal scenario or the most ambitious, let's say, way of helping this democratic movement in Belarus?
First, I have a few comments about the already announced steps by the EU and Ursula von der Leyen regarding Belarus, with this decision to give 53 million euro to Belarus, where where like those 3 million go together to the to support civil society and also the victims of repressions, and then 50 million to for the COVID-related support for healthcare system and business and some social services and stuff like that. I think that's, of course, that's a wonderful move, and like pragmatically speaking, EU doesn't owe us to do anything other than from a goodwill perspective. But like I would be cautious about this 50 million lump sum dedicated to Belarus. It sounds nicely, but can you hear me actually? Because I don't see anyone.
I can from Minsk.
Okay. okay. Let's okay. Everything disappeared. So I want to say that those are the money which were already negotiated by Belarus and EU within Eastern Partnership COVID recovery help. It was this sum was discussed back in April and May, and then the negotiations were stalled because EU said that Belarus has to have the agreement with IMF first. IMF pointed out that Belarus did not follow the quarantine instructions by the World Health Organization, and then Belarus did not get those money at the moment. And now when Lukashenko has beaten a few people on the streets, and when the protests broke out, then EU facilitated this money transfer, but essentially those are same money, that same amount which was already dedicated to Belarus. And here my caveat, my concern is that those money should be channeled through non-state agencies to make sure that the government does not use this money essentially to sustain the regime, and to check that those money are actually used for healthcare. But then again, how this is possible to check if the power is very much consolidated, and for years, those money which were sent by EU through Eastern Partnership channels, they were directed to the Belarusian government. But when we talk about more sort of practical and ideal moves which we would like to see here in Belarus, besides rhetoric of condemnation of what is happening in Belarus, I would also say that those even symbolic gestures that were showed by the solidarity chains in the Baltic states, which were happening over this past days, this also means a lot in terms of symbolic support for people in Belarus to know that they are not alone. Ideally, what we would like to see more is the support for the striking workers, and again, support, more substantial support for the people in Belarus, those who are striking, protesting, etc. And then encourage those who might be afraid of losing those salaries from strikes. Also, to strengthen the voice as much as it's possible of the Coordination Council, and maybe press the Belarusian authorities to drop those criminal charges and to force them to make some kind of negotiations. Maybe have some maybe safeguards or some support to Tikhanovskaya if she decides to go back to the country. Like that sounds very hypothetical, but ideally, like I would like to see some moves on behalf of EU to strengthen those voices of the consolidated opposition and to create some guarantees for them for a dialogue, that those people who dare to challenge the regime right now, that they won't have faced this imprisonment, and also to press to release political prisoners. But also the good question that is raised for past days is whether Belarus needs international mediation. There is pros and cons for that, because, well, this is a domestic crisis so far, and if we bring up international actors, we would bring the interests of the major powers inevitably, and then even if all of them ideally act from the noble causes, but still leave some possible room for like what are the interests of the major powers and all the neighbors from the, like, let's say West and East, who might be interested to jump in, but if it comes to the international negotiation, that I would say that OEC auspices and umbrella would be a good way to go. Also, particularly because there would be EU members on behalf of EU, but also Russia would at least not feel itself excluded from this kind of negotiations. It's not like we want Russia in, but if something happens on the Russia's doorstep without Russia sort of being invited to have some say in these negotiations, I think that Russia would act even like more aggressively. I think I'll stop here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, what we know here in the Czech Republic is that, for example, the fact that Lukashenka was not answering the phone calls from some EU leaders. And also what we know is that even the Coordination Council has rather weak connections, links, and contacts with the EU, let's say, embassies. I mean, today there was a first meeting between the EU ambassadors and the Council. So I would say that, yeah, this linkage between the EU with both sides, both with the authorities, Lukashenko's regime, and with the opposition is rather weak. And yes, I would completely agree with you, Katya, that OEC would be the best place to provide, this kind of intermediary role in that possible national dialogue. But again, let me now ask Jakub, what sort of expectations people in the streets have towards the EU? We know that these protests are not either pro-European nor pro-Russian, but are there any expectations that the EU would somehow, for example, punish more people that are responsible for that violence from the beginning of the protests, or would they expect microphone?
Yes, I wouldn't say that there is a specific demand which would then be like, send us this and that, or help with this completely and that. It's more like, don't leave us alone. And that is targeted both at EU or in general in the international community. So sorry to reply in this, but it's not like the people with whom I talk to, especially factory workers or protesters, they have a list of exactly 10 points which some key geopolitical players could do or shouldn't do. But the ask is, do not leave us alone. And that ask is not only for, like the factory workers have this ask to leaders within Belarus, to the Coordination Council. I think the same could go into international media, and that should be then transferred into EU. I think people are very much aware of their own connections to Russia, and at the same time, as it is not pro-Western or pro-EU, as let's say Maidan was, in a way that there was so many flags or so. It's not also not hostile. I think there is a huge, how to put it, it's very much around Belarus itself. It's not, you know, pro here, anti here, and so on, which I think is very interesting in terms of to observe, because it is very nation building, it's community building, you know, huge process on this way. Because a lot of movements, it's easy to start a movement on anti something, you know, when you're angry, pissed off, or something like this. But it's very hard usually for every community leader to transfer that energy into something positive. Whereas the energy on the streets is very positive. And I think as such, the worst energy for Lukashenko in terms of, you know, taking it down. It's more like, it's more like the Force, you know, if we were to use the movie analogy in this manner. So that's when it comes to this. You know, I think many people also sees the somewhat what Lithuania did. I think that the solidarity chain and Lithuania being very vocal. Also, Lithuania has a lot of historical society connections with Belarus or so, but that has been met with a lot of positive vibe and thanks. I think when it comes to let's say the Polish society, there has not been so many outbursts of such massive solidarity. I think it wakes a little bit up. Something is planned for Sunday. Our Prime Minister just said, actually, while we had this event, that Poland is against any invasion from Russia. I don't know if it means anything or so. I'm just quoting what he said. But I think this is the first time the Polish government has said something which has a teeth in a comment in regard of Belarus. So today was a busy day when it comes to our relations. It is also worth to notice when it comes to Poland that we did change the Minister of Foreign Affairs last week. And I think he was, since yesterday, the new minister has been sworn in. And he's already in Berlin during that meeting. So I think there might be some change, you know, when it comes to what Poland does in regard to Belarus.
But today, the Polish truck with humanitarian aid
Yes.
from Solidarność region was not let in.
So far,
Belarus.
not let in.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's still on the border,
yeah.
but yeah.
Katya, I see that you want to say something. So yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a quick comment on the sanctions regarding individuals that are discussed, like to impose regarding Belarusian officials guilty of the repressions, etc. I would say that yes, targeted sanctions are important, and they do create some inconvenience for the people involved. But that's essentially the cost of like doing business for the regime, and they will get along with this. Yes, this would be a little bit inconvenient, but this won't stop them from doing what they're doing. And also, I would say that Belarus and EU has a long experience of like 2 decades of sanctions, history of sanctions and distancing. And I think that's a good way. Not all of those sanctions were like efficient. Some of them turned Belarus into a closer embrace to Russia and making Belarus more dependent on Russia. So I would just say that I think we're now in we have enough material, like study material for the EU to have a look at what did not work with Lukashenko in the past, and probably come up with some new solutions based on those past mistakes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right, Katya. I'm now looking at the questions. We got another question, probably from somebody who joined us a bit later, because the question was already somehow touched upon. And let me now ask this question to Ales. So the question is, what are the different scenarios that Kremlin is currently contemplating? What sort of options do Russians have?
Well,
and of course, the others are free to join this. To join this discussion as well. But first, Ales.
Russia, anyway, Russia is interested right now in Belarus becoming weaker, because the weaker Belarus is, the more through Lukashenko or through another leader, Russia would be would have more possibilities and instruments to dominate Belarus. And still, for Putin, this is a matter of pride, and it's a very important thing, well, to correct this injustice, as he said, well, the end of the Soviet Union, and surely he tried to solve his own problems with staying in power through a new treaty with Belarus, new arrangement with Belarus. It failed, but now anyway, uh, Russia either supports more Lukashenko but imposes more limits on him, or Russia would, if Russia sees that Lukashenko is losing, Russia would try to become the main actor in main negotiator. And we know from experience that in 96 three in 1996 three Russian top officials came to Belarus, and they helped Lukashenko to stay in power, actually. And well, anyway, Russia would never agree a democratic change in Belarus, and especially pro-European change. And back again, thanks a lot, Jakub, for bringing this identity issue, a very important issue to the fore, because well, I used to say that we need in Belarus a kind of trinity: owners, more owners, not dependent upon state, more citizens ready to defend their rights. And we have spectacular examples of Belarusians claiming their political rights. But we need also more Belarusians who are aware of their Europeanness, and who want, well, who are proud of their own well, national belonging, and who also accept that, well, that we are different from any other neighbor. And you know, this is something, well, in Central Europe, a successful democratic change happened thanks to the combination of economic, geopolitical factors, but also national factors. Everybody wanted to get rid of the Soviet Union, and the same in Belarus would happen. So a democratic change is only possible when Belarus becomes less dependent upon Russia, and more aware of itself. That Belarusians, well, many people became proud of being Belarusian right now after this protest and this peaceful, one might say, revolution. But still, I didn't see an increase in those who speak Belarusian after the change, or I didn't see more applications for kids going to Belarusian language classes. And this is of paramount importance. This is why I'm a bit skeptical right now in short term, and we are still in our what Poles had in the 19th century in kind of organic work. We still have to create, to educate, to help each other, and to have more Belarusians, citizens, and owners. And this is the condition of successful change. And from the EU, let's me have also a say on that. There should be also this understanding that Belarus is not Russia, Belarus is Europe, not EU, but Europe, and there should be surely more moral assessment, and visa sanctions are important, but there should be more positive steps toward those Belarusians who were in the streets, and who would not everybody would live, even if we would have a really full-fledged military dictatorship. So, well, the EU, for its own sake, has to care more of those people who share the same value, and this is extremely important. There are visa issues, and well, more cooperation, less cooperation with the state authorities, maybe immediate freeze of all projects with public institutions right now. Because anyway, well, what is wrong with EU funds? Mostly in this consolidated authoritarian regime, they help to reappropriate the funds by the regime, and it to some extent consolidates the vertical structure of power, because it goes from the top to down. And well, there are more things to be done, and the EU has to go more direct and having more actors, more partners across Belarus, but also across neighboring countries which have better knowledge of Belarus, and this is extremely important. So to listen, and I was really appalled to listen from a French EU commissioner. Well, that Belarus is not Europe. This is not a way of supporting the people of Belarus in fighting. Sure, in the streets, there not much talk about geopolitics, but still, this is just awakening. It will come anyway if Belarusians wants to live in an independent country and a democratic country.
Thank you, Alex, because now you spoke out of my heart and mouth, because we are exactly saying the same things here in the Czech Republic when we communicate and advise the Czech Foreign Ministry on the strategy towards Belarus. And since you mentioned Commissioner Breton's quotes, I was also shocked to see it first in Reuters, and then I started to investigate what actually he said through some of my colleagues in Brussels. And actually, by Europe, he meant, and he made this kind of a mental shortcut, he meant the EU. So actually the statement should have been read that Belarus is not part of the EU. So that
it was a gift to Russian propaganda.
Exactly. I mean, we saw it that the pro-Russian media, even here in the Czech Republic, immediately jumped on it and were quoting this sentence and his way of interpreting our relations to Belarus in that way. So it was absolutely unfortunate. And I can tell you, we also do a lot of things to kind of better to tell our, let's say, officials to better communicate, be more active also on the ground in Belarus. So then we, as the Europeans, are seen as an actor who is actively acting and not reacting, as is happening all of the time. I will have a last question to all three of you. Now, we haven't mentioned one extremely important neighbor for Belarus, and it's Ukraine. And at the very beginning, when we were writing some analysis about the situation in Belarus, sometimes we were comparing these protests with Ukraine, or comparing the situation in Ukraine with Belarus. And then we got friendly advices from Belarusians not to do that, that actually Ukraine has rather a bad kind of image in Belarus, that it's associated with the failed state, with war, with disorder, so that Belarusians don't want to end up as Ukraine. And again, what is your personal take on that? Let's start with Jakub, maybe.
Here and here. Sorry, confused buttons. So when it comes to Ukraine, I mean, I think that what happens right now in Belarus is very much unique. And I am personally against, first of all, comparing it to what was happening in Poland. And I think too many Polish commentators is trying to filter it through experiences of 70s, 80s, and 89 in Poland. There was no internet back then, first of all, let's put it this way. Here, this is absolutely differently managed. Same goes for Maidan. I know that Lukashenka sometimes says that there will be no Maidan here or so. Maidan was different because Ukraine was much different. First of all, Ukraine was absolutely differently connected to Russia on an institutional level, not as much as Belarus is. That's first of all. The different thing is that there are oligarchs in Ukraine, and from Belarus perspective, you would see that having this different, I mean, this gives some kind of a pluralism. You know, we can discuss whether oligarchies are good or bad from Ukrainian point of view, but they do provide some support for different groups, political parties, or so. Here we have a very unified system. It's nation versus the government. It's not groups versus groups, you know, or so. So I think, you know, when it comes to simply protests or so, maybe some similarities could be found between Belarus and Hong Kong on a more how the protests are being structured, organized or so. Both are very much leaderless. They last a longer while, you know, water style approach, it's called, I think. I think what, for example, happened yesterday with the Philharmonica. from the members of the Philharmonic Orchestra who have, for past days, have been gathering at around, I think, 1 p.m. and just playing something. They have not been able to do it yesterday at 1 p.m. because they just showed up randomly. Was it yesterday? It was, I think, 2 days ago, sorry. They just showed up at some mall and just started to sing immediately, which was more as a flash mob, but it shows basically that it's not like what Lukashenko used to do. And he always had one strategy. First of all, send the riot police to protesters, and then get rid of the leader. He did those two things again here, and boom, it exploded in his face. It didn't work simply, but it did work for him for past 25 and a half years, let's put it this way. This approach, every election done this way. And people also adapted. My kids are coming back from kindergarten, so I have to finish before they run into here. No, I think Ukraine, is important in this, for example, to provide safety to some people who are fleeing. Many people, because of COVID, they do not have Schengen visas. I think, for example, Poland only yesterday said that from tomorrow, I think there will be a new way of, Poland will resume giving visas for Belarusians. But that is one problem. So frankly speaking, well, you have Schengen, Russia, and Ukraine. And many people, if they are fleeing, for example, like this factory worker who escaped through the window, he just, ran immediately to Ukraine or so. So I think in this, and I know that even though Ukraine yesterday introduced this ban on foreign arrivals due to COVID-19, I think Belarusians will be able to still go through the border due to humanitarian reasons. So that door should not stay closed. That's basically from me on this question.
Okay, thank you, Kuba. So run now for your kids. That was great to have you here. Thank you to you. Thank you to all your colleagues from Outriders, because you, as I said, have been doing a tremendous job. So thank you for being us. So
I just want to say one thing. Because while you were talking, many things is happening. So first of all, very bad news is that on the Victoria Square, many journalists have been detained. I mean, has been taken for a conversation, according to official sources. Around 20 people, my reporter tells me. I just have to say that we have not seen such an anti-media action for in a longer while done by Lukashenko. Rather, I would say journalists were more or less allowed to operate. But they were taken into one bus. I presume it's going to be following what's happening from Monday. Something starts, there is immediate reaction. So we will see what is going to be the result, probably some kind of warning talk or maybe short arrest. I don't think so, because many, at least according to the movie, I see many people in the blue vests, which would be a signal that they have official accreditation. But there might be some people there who were those media tourists, accidentally were walking in this journalist crowd, as we know, while looking for top 10 cafes to visit in Minsk. So we are very intrigued to see what's going to be the reaction, but it's definitely a clear signal to media. Up until, I would say, this moment, it was all people who were on strike, it was the protesters, women, more, and now it's time for media, which was, of course, kind of expected, but yeah, we'll see what happens next. So it is even more going back to my appeal from my first talk. It's very important to, at least for international media, to try, just so even they can transmit the message that they tried, because it sends a very important signal to the journalist community that they do. And, there is another thing, it's like media have to be present, especially in different cities. We have seen that in Soligorsk, for example, there's only 3 journalists or so. This is, of course, natural. Smaller cities, not as important as capital always. We see this in every country, but it supports then people who are protesting, that they feel that there's the presence of media, So as much as I am not a commentator or so on the geopolitics, I am a commentator on how media works. So I think this is really important, and that there is something could be done, even if journalists were to try, as we were saying, to try to cross as tourists or so. Why not? As we said, the night on the Minsk airport is not the worst thing which can happen to you if you are a journalist. So we should all try. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Bye.
Yeah. See you then soon, and all the best. Right. So, Katya and Alex, do you still want to say anything about these Belarusian-Ukrainian comparisons?
Yes, sure.
All right. Yeah, please go ahead.
First, about media. Well, just developing what Jakub said, the EU should support the independent media. The popularity of Radio Liberty, of Belsat, is showing that it was done in the right direction. There should be more support for independent media. It is extremely important. And this is a really propaganda. This is a propaganda war, waged by the regime. So the EU has to have counter propaganda, and the Belarusians talking to Belarusians. This is the best way of countering this Russian regime's propaganda. Then I would also contradict Jakub. What is Maidan? And everybody refers to Lukashenka, but Maidan is happening in Belarus. This is a dignity revolution, and many people in Belarus are talking about the dignity. This is essential. And what is Maidan substantially? This is mobilization of people claiming their political rights because the regime doesn't hear to their concerns. And this is exactly what is happening in Belarus. And there should be comparison, surely. And we are close countries. And Ukraine is very important. Well, I wish Ukraine every success in the European integration. It's important that Ukraine also joins any EU or all EU sanctions that EU would implement against the regime. It is very important because many officials travel across Ukraine. And I understand that Lukashenka, to some extent, is popular in Ukraine. I hope that his popularity is much much less now. But this is we are in the region, and this is extremely important for us to be compared. Surely, Ukraine has its setbacks and problems, but we very close to Ukrainians, and comparison should be there. And the way Lukashenko uses the word Maidan and other derivatives shows that he's pretty much afraid of that, and we should understand what was at the core value at Maidan. Well, the people's will, and this is the most important. I'm done. Do you hear me? I don't hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Good.
Where's David?
David disappeared.
It's three of us.
Okay. Well, anyway, Katsiaryna, I think that we are still on the record, so continue with.
Okay, 4 people coming. Okay, great. So when we talk about comparisons with Ukraine, I would say that Ukraine did not have that much oppression of the civil society, did not have that strict control over political parties at the times when Maidan happened. And when Belarusians were, in the past years, I remember those conversations with think tanks, let's say in Washington, when policymakers would question why Belarusians do not request this change, why they do not show up on the streets, as it happened in, let's say, Georgia, Ukraine, elsewhere. I would say that Belarusians operated for years in a very restricted environment in terms of expressing anything related to politics. Like generally, you're safe and fine in Belarus unless you touch political subject, or you can. If you want to demonstrate, to conduct demonstration on the street in Belarus, you can do so happily for a good 1-2 minutes before police would drag you into a van and then bring to a detention center. That was the sort of the environment before this developments happened in Belarus after these elections. And I would say that now we've reached this point of boiling of unsatisfaction in the society, where Belarusians indeed awaken the sense of nation and dignity when those repressions do not stop them anymore. Also, when we talk about Ukraine, from my impression from conversations with like journalists and diplomats in Ukraine was that they underestimate the role of the current opposition leaders, or at least like the Coordination Council and the personality of Tikhanovskaya, because for their perspective, those are not important enough, like those actors are not important enough, and then they might have pro-Russian way to pro-Russian views, and then they might idealize Lukashenko. Some like maybe ordinary people in Ukraine, those who just watch the TV and do not like they might be very much charmed by the personality of Lukashenko, or they used to, because like of this harsh criticism he imposed on the ministries and the bureaucracy, and like that was, at least from my understanding, the perception of Lukashenko in Ukraine. I think now it's changing, but also when we draw parallels, I'm not a big fan of drawing those parallels of Belarus, like how different or this is from the neighbor countries, because, well, if we compare a revolution or some unrest to neighboring countries, this does not guarantee that the scenario in Belarus would unravel according to the exact same scenarios. And here maybe like what I see of more useful, like if one wants to analyze like how the regimes fall, how the dictatorship fall, it's better to use the aggregated data and historical cases, and there is a plenty of those studies in the academic literature which conduct more sort of like scientific approach and analyze similar conditions over, let's say, like past 100 years or like in the immediate history, but do not necessarily tie those comparisons to the region, because even though we are neighbors, we have different political conditions.
Thank you, Katya. Thank you, Ales. We will have to finish here. So thank you to both of you and to Jakub for spending the time with us, for finding the time. I guess that what you said was carefully listened by many of our viewers, and we definitely also will work with many thoughts that you expressed today. On our side, let me ensure that here, at least in the Czech Republic, we have a lot of friends, lots of colleagues who are fully supporting your efforts. So you can count on our solidarity, on our support. So whenever there is to be done, please contact us and we will do our best from our side. So thank you very much. Stay safe, and our fingers crossed for you, for Belarus. Živa Belarus. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.